Hi there, Polly here with Mr. Snoots again. Yay! So just some notes on the making of Mus of Kerbridge. So, for those of you who didn't see the last video, my first novel, Mus of Kerbridge, is out in print again. This is a book that I wrote in 1988 and 89, and it's been in print for 30 years. New edition is out, and I'm so happy to have it out because it's just such a lovely story. And, you know, it's now rebranded under my new name, so that's kind of a nice feeling. But making of. So this has been written in 98, 99. Now, I hadn't been that long out of university, like, what, 2, 3, or 5. So I got out of university in 1985 and very keen to be an author. I really wanted to be a writer. So at university, I had studied literature and history and philosophy and so on. My history, on-screen history, focused largely on English Civil War and 17th century European history because it was something I was particularly fascinated by as a kid, and that remains a love of mine to this day and explains my signature. But I became very interested in comics and so on. I began working with Melbourne House, which was a computer games company in those very early heady days of computer games. That was the first job I actually got. And I was writing on the Lord of the Rings games project there. But there were two really nice programmers there, wacky chaps, and one of these guys, Doug, was a comic book fanatic. So he dragged me into a comic book store, and that's where I discovered independent black and white comics, which were amazing. Great art, fantastic stories. This was where all the good stuff was happening, none of that Marvel DC crap. So I began really working on my own role-playing games at this period, but also working to hone my craft as a writer. I would set myself massive writing exercises and doing it. But through those comic books, I got to know Stephen Galacci, who was the artist who did Albedo, and he also did a series called Birthright, which was in an anthology magazine called Critters. And when I finished the Albedo role-playing game, which was all written illicitly at work, I got over to Gen Con. Steve Galacci met me. He came to the convention and everything. And he introduced me to an ARPA called Raoul-Brazel. Now, reaching back into the mists of time, stare into Mr. Snoot's eyes, you're in the mists of time, wink. ARPAs, they still exist, Amateur Publishing Association. So, this is like a club where people join and there's a set publication schedule. I think Raoul-Brazel was quarterly. Over that quarter of a year, you prepare a submission. This submission is then sent into the editor, and normally you're told what the membership of the magazine is. Like, I think we had about, well, it went up to about 70 odd members for a while there, I think. But you do 70 copies, or you basically scoot some money to the editor so he can print 70 copies, you know, at the local copy shop. They then collate all of everyone's submissions into a giant magazine, and Raoul-Brazel was huge, so it would usually come out as like 4 volumes stapled as thick as they could. And then everyone gets posted a copy of the ARPA, so you see everyone's zine, everyone's contribution in the thing. Raoul-Brazel was kind of started off as a place for a lot of the real avant-garde kind of alt comic people, but it spun off from a thing called Vooty, which is where Vaughn Baudet and a whole lot of people like that had been, Robert Crumb, these sorts of people. It had split off to become very specifically for fans of anthropomorphics. Now, in them days, that was fans of non-human characters. So that could be anything from funny animal characters, what you think of now as furries, or centaurs, or, you know, animated furniture, talking plants, fishes under the sea, whatever. Talking amoebas. Not stories that involved characters that weren't human. So that included, people who were doing old style Sword and Planet, Edgar Rice Burroughs-y sort of Warriors of Marsumi stuff, all this kind of thing. And it was an amazing elite of creators. So I was very, very chuffed to be invited in. So one of the things about ARPAs is this was like I said, a relatively elite ARPA. You had to have a pretty high level of skill to be asked in. But ARPAs are a place to kind of learn your craft and be bad. So I began, first off, I did like a novel which has never seen print, which was pretty much a fan work set in the Albedo game universe. And that was me trying to, get my first skills at longer story forms. But then I started work on Mus of Kerbridge. And this was serialized over a year, I think, year and a half in the magazine. And what was kind of neat is that people could make suggestions about, maybe contract this, maybe this should be a bit long. But pretty much what you see is what came out in that magazine. And it was a great place to be bad. You could learn your craft without, damaging the brains of too big an audience. But in Mus's case, I think Mus was really appreciated. And but here's the thing. We were paid so little. I was the head of the games design department for one of the foundation computer game companies in the world. So I did so many games that are quite famous. I was paid so little for this that I couldn't afford a computer. Couldn't afford to buy one at all. So I had to write this on the computers at work. Now, they had the first little black and white Apple. Apple II? Might have been. But that was what they had in the office for me to work in. Now, it's a box. I don't know, it's bigger than a bread box, but smaller than a house fan. It is a heavy POS. It was monstrous. So, to write Mus, what I was doing was, when it came time to go home, I was having to look left, look right, make sure no one saw me, unplug the Apple computer, stuff it in a duffel bag along with its cables and its keyboard, and get out of work down the back stairs where no one could see me. Then I had to take this home, 2.5 hours on public transport, and then sit at home and write Mus till late hours of the night. And then I had to somehow get some sleep because I've got to get to work very early the next morning because I've got to be the first one in because I've got to plug everything back in again so no one knows I've taken the sodding computer. This is how Mus was written. Lugging this massive computer back and forth, 5 hours of transport each day, lovingly writing this thing out. Now, when it came to editing it, I had to have hard copies to edit it and go through. But it's line printers back then. The laser printer had not been invented. No inkjets, ladies and gentlemen. A line printer. On paper with the perforations down the sides of the cog. So when it came time to print out copies to try and read it and edit, I had to carry the entire printer home as well and massive boxes of the paper. So basically, I had to make multiple trips to get this stuff and I had to time it to do it over a weekend because it took, I think printing out Mus took something like 28 solid hours on the printer. And if something skipped, if a cog went, it would, you'd lose pages of it because it would print over the same line. So, you basically had to keep this thing pretty much under your eye. So you really couldn't sleep while the thing was printing out. And then I would go through and see errors and correct over the next week, work patiently through, write that stuff out. There we go. So that was the production process for how this thing was done. A work of love, ladies and gentlemen. But here we are today, about 45 novels under my belt. But yeah, this thing was just pure love. That was the only way to get this level of commitment done. Now, I then had a novel And I was desperately trying to find someone to publish it. And of course, no one will touch you because, you're a new writer. Why don't you just crawl off into a hole and die? But in those days, and indeed today, we were still labouring under all the advice that came from the previous generation of writers. The Isaac Asimovs, the Robert Heinleins, the Harry Harrisons, who tell you, oh, just keep on putting it out there, eventually someone will take it, and so on. No, that is great, great advice if you're writing in the 60s or 70s. By the time the 80s were running their course and into the 90s, and indeed today, that is not going to happen for you. That is not how it's done. Basically, you need to kidnap someone's children and send chunks of them through the post until an editor agrees. But I decided what I would do is start doing the thing, and I would start somehow getting over to conventions and trying to track down editors, which was not working. I went to Worldcons and these sorts of things, but I went to Worldcon in San Francisco. Now, there is a book of mine called Faye, which is out there on Amazon. It's the rudest thing I've ever written, and it's wonderful. And it is coming out in a new edition soon as well. That is kind of a piss take in many ways on what happened next, because it turns out that Tor Books have a enormous party that they run for, like, the publishing elite. They take over the penthouse of the Con Hotel that Worldcon is in, and they run this very la-di-da party that only the publishing elite can get into. But I managed to wrangle an invite to this, mostly by being very Australian, and essentially they left the box unguarded, so I swiped one of the invitation letters. But I got up there, and I was horrified, absolutely horrified. For one thing, this was just an environment where people are denigrating each other left, right, and centre. These writers realise that there are only limited slots for publishing books amongst these publishers. So if you can destroy another writer, if you can tear them down, that makes it more likely that your one will get published. So these authors were monsters, ladies and gentlemen, absolute monsters. You could see them trying to plant gossip and disinformation, and it was literally, it was like being at the court at Versailles watching these people. And the other aspect of the court of Versailles was watching the casting couch activity. There was a reason why these parties were done on a whole floor. That's because that's where lots of senior editors had their bedrooms. Enough said. So there was this really nice guy that I was talking to. We just looked at each other, and after a while, so I said, if I stay here 1 minute more, I'm going to start pushing some of these people down an elevator shaft. And he said, me too. I can't stand it anymore. I'm going. I said, oh, yeah. Bar? I said, bar. So we both got the elevator down there. And at this stage, I was really upset because I had worked a lifetime to be an author. I had poured my education into being it. I'd poured my heart and soul into wanting to be this. And this is the industry. I don't want to be associated with these people. They were vile. So I just started talking with this guy. And he was just the nicest guy. And then we started talking role-playing games, and he lit up because he was this huge D&D fan and a huge RuneQuest fan and a Traveller fan, and we're talking back and forth, and this is my life. I just put out the Albedo game. He's played the Albedo game. That was brilliant. He loved it. What else are you doing? Oh, I've done this thing called Lace and Steel. Oh, Lace and Steel. I love that. That's fantastic. It's got emotions, and it's got romance, and it's got this amazing kind of card-driven combat system. Yeah. And then, so I said, why were you at that party? He says, his name was Rob King, and he was the editor for TSR's books line. So, and he suddenly turned around and said, look, I was actually supposed to come out of this convention with a, hey, any cool new stuff? So, you wouldn't happen to have any books, novels written, would you? I said, why, yes, I do. I said, oh my God, can you tell me what it's about? So I pitched Mus to him and said, oh my God, can you send that to me? And it's like, well, I happen to have it on floppy disk, ladies and gentlemen. Why don't you have a copy? Which he did. And that's how Mus was sold. Just one of those things where fate smiled upon me. Rob's an excellent guy. He's still out there. I think you'll find him on the OSR RPG, the rainbow flagged one, on a page on Facebook and everything. Lovely, lovely guy. But TSR brought Mus out. Now, TSR at that stage published 2 streams of books. It did do games-oriented ones based on its own games, but it did an independent fiction line. And it was a great little independent fiction line because they gave many of us our first start because they were willing to take a punt on new writers. And in doing that, I think they did a fantastic service to the creative community. I really do. I will love and honour TSR forever for that book department. I know the company kind of ended in madness and weird things happened in the end, but that book department kicked off a great many people's careers and brought us a great many amazing stories. So thank you, TSR. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob. I went on to write D&D novels for them. So I did A Council of Blades. I did, when they brought in 3rd edition, they asked me if I could do books to launch 3rd edition. So I did White Plume Mountain, Descent to the Depths of the Earth, Queen of the Demon Web Pits, and later on I did a Gamma World novel for them, Red Sails in the Fallout. But unfortunately, when TSR was brought over and so on, they had, before the company collapsed, they had cut their independent fiction line, which is a damn shame, a real damn shame, and I think was part of their collapse, actually. But anyway, and of course, under their new ownership, Wizards of the Coast and so on, they have not only never brought back their independent fiction line, but they've now ceased publishing D&D novels as well, which is incredibly stupid in a world where the storytelling media around an IP is such an important part of creating interest and a buzz and canon for the IP. But anyway, not my biz. So anyway, that is the weirdly torturous story of how Mus of Kerbridge was created. By the way, in order to get the mouse correct for Mus, there was actually a pet mouse involved at the time. I had a pet mouse in a cage specifically, so I could just, it was a sweet little creature, and it was just how they move, what they do, the things they're up to. So you'll see a lot of that in the book. The mouse moves like a mouse, and the book has actually been used for teaching, which, since it was a first novel, I find interesting, because the 17th century English is correct. I find particularly American authors have no idea how to use their these and thous. So this broke those rules. It uses these and thous because I can bloody speak that way. I'm an expert in history of the period, which means literature of the period. Side note, my Effectuators novels, the main character in Effectuators, Brilliana Stetham, her first name, Brilliana, that is another English Civil War period name. As far as I know, there's only ever been one person in real life called Brilliana, but she was great, and she left us many diaries and things. She's one of the very few female voices in history of the period. Anyway, but yeah, I really have enjoyed seeing how much people have loved Mus of Kerbridge over the years. Mus came out in German as Die Maus von Kerbridge, and I met a whole bunch of people who were US Army brats, and this book was their companion. Where are we? Hang on, here it is. Here's the TSR version, by the way. So that's Janelle Jaquays' cover art. Now, when I got to Gen Con, I met Janelle Jaquays in her previous male incarnation, and she lit up when she met, because that painting was apparently one of her favourite pieces of art that she had done, and she'd kept the painting through all the years. She loved it, and I don't know if she still sort of had it in her latter days. I'll have to ask her partner, Rebecca. But it was so nice because when I was a kid, I got the pocket games from metagaming. I loved them. But my favourite, because I'm obsessed with insects, was Chiton 1, which I adore. Now, Janelle Jaquays had done the art for Chiton 1, and I just loved those bugs and everything so much. So as we're talking about Mus and how she had done the cover and everything, she suddenly lit up and just opened the portfolio when I was talking about how much I loved Chiton, and I always carry a copy with me. And she just had the original artwork there, and she just gave it to me. She just said, "Oh, I've got it right here. Why don't you have it?" So somewhere here I have all the original art for my favourite board game of all time, gifted to me by the person who did the cover for my very first novel. Thank you, Janelle. You lit up my life. So yes, that is the intriguing tale of Mus of Kerbridge. Physical research for Mus, of course, from being a 17th century historian. Now, I have been to England many times, the UK, and of course I've crawled over most fortresses and so on, Star Trace forts and all this sort of stuff. I've also, at that stage, I was a top level fencer, so particularly épée, fencing at the sort of interstate level, which was in Australia pretty top stuff. But I had also been with the English Civil War Enactment Society when I was over in England. So I had been firing matchlocks and in the pike line and on horseback as a cavalryman and so on. I still have English Civil War period or English Civil War reenactors armour, so they are replicas of English Civil War material, but I still have a full cavalry lobster tail helmet, breast and back, and so on here, which were made by an armourer called Len Sutton, who was quite famous. He did a lot of movie props as well, but he also famously, he was a fellow of the Royal College of Armourers and actually did work for the royal family. So then Prince Charles, now King Charles, actually displays Len Sutton's work in his office, which is rather cool. So anyway, yes, interesting and amazing things. We are happy that Mus is out. Anyway, that was a long journey of Mus. Bye!